I would like to say thank you for taking the time to visit my channel, just all in one resource. Before I start the story, I wish to ask that no one use this video or the story on any of their channels without first requesting permission from me. You can send me an email, and I promise I will respond. This story is about the dangerous job of being a saturation diver. I hope you enjoy the story. The team of saturation divers huddled together in the cramped diving bell, their helmets and suits already on and their equipment at the ready. They knew what was waiting for them outside the bell, in the icy depths of the Mariana Trench. It was a place that few humans had ever been, and fewer still had ever returned from. But this was their job, their mission. They were here to explore the unknown depths and gather data that could change the course of history. The diving bell began to lower, and the divers felt the pressure increase as they descended further and further into the abyss. The only sounds were the low hum of the diving bell's machinery and the steady breathing of the divers. They communicated with each other through a series of hand signals, each one knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. Finally, they reached the ocean floor, and the diving bell settled into place. The divers began to prepare themselves for their descent into the unknown. They checked their equipment one final time, then stepped out of the diving bell and into the icy water. Immediately, they felt the crushing weight of the ocean pressing down on them. The water was so cold that it felt like knives slicing through their skin, despite the thick wetsuits they wore. But they pushed on, driven by a sense of adventure and purpose. As they swam deeper into the abyss, they saw creatures that they had never seen before. Strange and eerie shapes moved through the darkness, illuminated only by the lights on their helmets. Some were familiar, like giant squids and anglerfish, but others were completely new to them. Suddenly, one of the divers noticed a shadow moving past him, just out of sight. He signaled to the others, and they all turned to face the darkness. They knew that this was a dangerous place, and that they could never let their guard down. But they also knew that they were here to explore, to push the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. And so, they pushed forward, deeper into the abyss, their hearts beating fast with both fear and excitement. What lay ahead of them was unknown, but they were determined to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. As the diving bell descended deeper into the abyss, the pressure outside increased. The team of divers inside the bell was tense, but they were professionals, and they knew they had a job to do. The dim light from their headlamps revealed the murky surroundings outside the bell. They saw strange creatures that they had never seen before, like glowing jellyfish that pulsed with a neon light, and giant shrimp-like creatures that scuttled across the seabed. The divers knew that they had to be careful. Any mistake could be fatal. They communicated with each other through a system of hand signals and nods. Their friendship and years of experience working together made them a cohesive team, and they trusted each other with their lives. Suddenly, one of the divers noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye. He turned to look, and for a split second, he saw a dark shape moving quickly past him. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but it was gone. He shook his head, thinking he must have been mistaken. The team continued their work, collecting samples and taking measurements. But every so often, they saw the dark shapes moving past them again. They couldn't identify what it was, but they knew it wasn't any creature they had seen before. The divers couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for an opportunity to strike. As the diving bell reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the divers prepared to leave the safety of the bell and venture into the unknown. They donned their diving suits, checking and double-checking every seal and valve. They knew that even the tiniest leak could mean certain death at these depths. Finally, they opened the hatch and stepped out into the darkness. Their headlamps illuminated only a few feet in front of them, leaving the rest of the abyss shrouded in mystery. They swam slowly, careful not to disturb the sediment on the seafloor. As they swam, they encountered more strange creatures, a school of iridescent fish that darted around them, a massive eel with jaws that could crush bone, and a squid with tentacles as long as a man. But despite the beauty of these creatures, the divers couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, one of the divers heard a sound. It was a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from all around them. The team froze, their lights darting around in all directions. Then, they saw it, a massive shadow moving in the distance, slowly getting closer. They tried to swim away, but the shadow was faster. It was a giant octopus, easily twice the size of the diving bell. Its eyes glinted in the light, and its tentacles reached out to grab the divers. They dodged and weaved, but the octopus was too quick. One of the divers was caught in its grasp, his suit beginning to buckle under the pressure. The rest of the team rallied, grabbing their tools and trying to pry the octopus's tentacles off their friend. With every passing moment, the pressure grew stronger, and they knew they had to act quickly. Finally, they managed to free their friend, and they all swam as fast as they could back to the safety of the diving bell. As they closed the hatch behind them, the team let out a collective sigh of relief. They had survived, but they knew that the dangers of the deep sea were not over yet. The crew continued to work tirelessly on the construction of the underwater habitat, using the diving bell as their temporary shelter until the structure was complete. It was a slow and tedious process, but they knew that the end result would be worth it. As they worked, the divers couldn't shake the feeling of being constantly watched. The darkness outside the diving bell seemed to be alive with movement, and the eerie silence was only broken by the occasional creaking of metal or the sound of their own breathing. Suddenly, one of the divers noticed something moving in the distance. It was a shadow, but it seemed to be moving with purpose. The other divers noticed it too, and they all watched with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. As the shadow drew closer, they realized that it was a massive creature. It had long tentacles and glowing eyes that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. The divers watched in awe as the creature circled the diving bell, examining it with an almost curious interest. Despite their fear, the divers were fascinated by the creature's size and beauty. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. After a few minutes, the creature swam off into the darkness, leaving the divers shaken but inspired by the mysterious world they were exploring. As they continued their work, the divers couldn't help but wonder what other creatures lurked in the depths of the Mariana Trench. They knew that they were in a world that few humans had ever explored and that the dangers they faced were very real. But they were determined to push forward and complete their mission, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As the days went by, the diving crew found themselves falling into a routine. They spent most of their time in the diving bell, taking turns to go out and work on the habitat. The work was grueling, and the constant darkness and isolation was starting to wear on their nerves. But they tried to keep each other's spirits up, joking and chatting during their breaks. One day, as they were working on the habitat, they noticed something strange. A shadow moved past them, and they felt a sudden chill in the water. They looked around, but couldn't see anything. They shrugged it off, thinking it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But as the days went by, they saw more and more strange shadows moving around them. They started to feel like they were being watched. They tried to ignore it, but the feeling of unease lingered. One night, as they were getting ready to sleep in the diving bell, they heard a loud banging sound from outside. They rushed to the portholes, but all they could see was darkness. The banging continued, and they realized it was coming from the outside of the bell. They were terrified, not knowing what was causing the noise. They decided to use the cameras attached to the diving bell to see what was happening outside. They looked at the footage, and their blood ran cold. They saw a massive creature with long tentacles banging on the bell. They had never seen anything like it before. The diving crew knew that they had to be careful from now on. They were in uncharted waters, and they had no idea what other creatures were lurking around them. They had to stay alert if they wanted to make it out of the Mariana Trench alive. As the days went by, the divers' progress in building the underwater habitat was slow but steady. They were constantly aware of the dangers they faced with every dive, but their determination to succeed kept them going. They also grew closer as a team, relying on each other not only for their safety, but also for their sanity in the isolated depths of the Mariana Trench. One day, as they were working on the habitat's foundation, they noticed a strange shadow moving past them. At first, they thought it was just their imagination, but then they saw it again, and this time it was clearer. It was a large creature, unlike anything they had ever seen before. Their initial fear turned into curiosity as they watched the creature swim around them, almost as if it was studying them. It had a strange, almost otherworldly appearance, with translucent skin and long, flowing tendrils that trailed behind it. The divers were both awed and frightened by the creature's presence, but they also knew that this was a rare opportunity to witness something truly extraordinary. They carefully observed the creature and took footage of it with their cameras, hoping to learn more about its behavior and habitat. The rest of the day was spent in a mixture of excitement and awe, as they talked about what they had just witnessed. They knew that they had experienced something truly unique and unforgettable, and it only added to their appreciation of the mysteries and wonders of the deep sea. The divers were starting to feel the weight of the deep, dark ocean around them. Every time they went outside the diving bell, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Small orbs would appear out of nowhere and dart around them, causing their hearts to race with fear. They couldn't quite figure out what the orbs were or where they came from, but they knew they didn't belong there. One night, as the crew was working on the habitat, they saw something new. A creature they had never seen before. It was long and slimy, with tentacles writhing about as it swam past them. They were mesmerized by the creature's movements, but their fascination quickly turned to terror as they realized it was getting closer. The creature wrapped one of its tentacles around the diving bell, squeezing it tight. The divers frantically tried to radio the ship for help, but their communications were scrambled. They were trapped, with no way to escape. Suddenly, the creature released its grip and swam away into the darkness. The divers breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew they had just encountered something beyond their understanding. They went back inside the diving bell, shaken but determined to continue their work. As they sat in silence, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The orbs were back, whipping around them faster than before. But this time, they were accompanied by a low rumbling sound. The divers knew they had to act fast before something even more terrifying happened. The eerie whale songs continued to echo throughout the water, their haunting melodies sending shivers down the divers' spines. It was as if they were being watched by some unseen presence, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in the dark depths. As they continued their work on the habitat, the divers became more and more uneasy. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, and they were constantly on edge, expecting something to jump out at him from the darkness. Despite the ominous atmosphere, the divers pressed on, determined to complete their mission. They worked tirelessly, lowering materials and constructing the structure piece by piece. Hours passed, and the whale songs eventually faded away, leaving the divers in an eerie silence. But the peace was short-lived, as the darkness was suddenly illuminated by a bright light. The divers shielded their eyes, trying to make out the source of the light. It was then that they saw it, a massive creature, unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was almost 30 feet long, with massive jaws and glowing eyes that seemed to stare right through them. The creature swam slowly around the diving bell, as if examining it, before disappearing into the darkness once again. The divers were left in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of what they had just witnessed. Despite the terrifying encounter, the divers were determined to press on, even more resolved to finish building the habitat. They knew that they were in uncharted territory, and that there were still many mysteries waiting to be uncovered in the depths of the Mariana Trench. The divers received an urgent message from the ship above. A massive storm was approaching and they needed to get inside the diving bell for safety. The announcement sent chills down their spines. They quickly gathered all of their tools and equipment, making sure nothing was left behind, and scrambled into the diving bell. As they huddled together in the cramped space, the storm raged on. The wind howled, and the waves crashed against the surface of the ocean, causing the diving bell to rock violently. The divers felt like they were being tossed around like rag dolls, and fear began to take hold of them. The storm lasted for 2 days, and during that time, the divers were stuck inside the diving bell. They couldn't see anything outside. They were constantly on edge, waiting for the storm to pass, but it seemed like it would never end. As the storm finally subsided, and received the okay to continue on with their work. The storm had been a sobering reminder of just how vulnerable they were, even with all of their advanced equipment and training. They knew that they would have to be even more careful and cautious as they continued their work on the ocean floor. The team continued to work on the underwater habitat, chatting occasionally over the radio as they worked. They talked about everything from their families back home to their favorite foods. As they worked, they grew more comfortable with each other, sharing jokes and teasing each other. After a few hours working on the habitat, they took a break to have something to eat and get some rest. They sat in the diving bell, eating their sandwiches and drinking water. They talked about their progress and their plans for the rest of the week. They discussed the challenges they had faced so far, but also the satisfaction of seeing the habitat slowly taking shape. As they finished their lunch, they heard a strange sound through their headsets. It was a high-pitched whine, almost like a scream. They all looked at each other, wondering what it could be. Then, they heard it again, louder this time. "What the hell is that?" One of them said, looking around nervously. "I don't know," another replied. They all looked out through the portholes, trying to see if they could spot anything. But all they could see was the dark water around them, the beams of their lights illuminating only a small area. Then, suddenly, they felt a jolt. The diving bell shook violently, and they could hear the sound of metal scraping against rock. They all gasped, gripping their seats tightly. As the divers waited for the unthinkable, everything became quiet. The divers decided to rest for a while before heading back out to continue the work on the habitat. After a few hours, the divers left the relative safety of the diving bell and went straight back to work. Work progressed at a steady pace. No shadows could be seen, no strange sounds, just eerie silence. The peaceful silence was then broken by a strange sound that seemed to come from nowhere but everywhere. It was a low, deep rumble that made the divers look in every direction in hopes of seeing where the sound was coming from. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard before. "Okay, that was strange. Any of you hear that sound before?" One of the divers asked nervously. "I don't know, but it sounded like it came from deep within the trench," another replied. The sound persisted, growing louder and more intense. It was a deep, guttural noise that seemed to vibrate through the water and into the divers' bones. After a few minutes, the sound subsided, and the divers were left only with silence and the occasional whale song. "Whatever made that sound, we better keep our eyes open," one of the divers said. The divers soon felt something was off, and they could no longer hear the whales any longer. The divers started to look around nervously. After a few minutes, they suddenly noticed that the water around them had become still and eerily silent. Then, just as suddenly as the silence had come, it was broken by a loud and unsettling moan that echoed through the water. It was a sound that they recognized from the bloop sound, a sound that had been recorded by scientists years ago and had remained a mystery ever since. The divers froze, paralyzed with fear as they listened to the haunting sound. They knew that something was out there, but none of them could say what exactly it was. "I swear, guys, this place is the worst I have ever worked in," exclaimed one of the divers. One of the divers closest to the diving bell noticed a string of bubbles rising from the bottom of the trench. He immediately motioned for the other divers to get in the bell. As the divers were getting closer to the diving bell, they noticed a massive crack begin to form which began further down the trench. They watched the trench floor rip even further, and they noticed one of the sides of the rip heaved up and down with such force it shook the diving bell, threatening to tear the bell away from its tether as it tried to suck the bell into the ever-widening tear. Suddenly the ocean came alive, bursting with bubbles and smoke as the freezing water met the lava which began to appear. The divers sat inside the diving bell, trembling as they watched the fiery inferno engulf their once peaceful and secure habitat. The cracking sound of the earth continued to echo through the water, a haunting reminder of the danger that they were in. The heat emanating from the molten lava was suffocating, making it difficult to breathe. The divers huddled together, trying to calm their frayed nerves and make sense of what was happening. As they watched the lava continue to spew out of the Earth's crust, they realized that they were completely helpless. There was nothing that they could do but wait and pray that the diving bell would protect them from the deadly molten lava. The minutes felt like hours as they sat in silence, their minds racing with fear and uncertainty. The divers could see the lava inching closer and closer to the diving bell. They could feel the heat radiating from the molten rock, making it nearly impossible to stay calm. The once dark abyss surrounding them had been replaced by an angry red glow, as if they were trapped in the belly of a volcano. Just when they thought that all hope was lost, the lava began to recede, slowly crawling back into the depths of the earth. The divers were left in shock and disbelief, their hearts pounding in their chests as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. As the lava retreated, they saw the remnants of their habitat, now buried under a thick layer of molten rock. The divers were overwhelmed with sadness and despair, realizing that they had lost everything they had worked so hard to build. The commander's voice crackled over the intercom, "Attention divers, we are aborting the mission. I repeat, we are aborting the mission. We need you to return to the surface immediately." The divers quickly packed up their tools and made their way back to the diving bell. As they ascended towards the surface, the commander's voice came through the speakers again. "What happened down there? Why did you have to abort the mission?" One of the divers, his voice shaking, replied, "There was a volcanic eruption at the bottom of the trench. The earth split open and lava started spewing out. We barely made it out in time." The commander's voice sounded concerned. "Are you all okay? Did anyone get hurt?" Once the diving bell was back on the ship and properly docked, the divers inside the bell could hear the ship's crew applauding and cheering. The commander quickly called for a debriefing, wanting to hear more about what had happened at the bottom of the trench. The divers recounted their experience in detail, describing the ominous sound they had heard before the eruption and the lava that had swallowed up the habitat. The rest of the crew listened in awe and horror. The commander sighed. "Well, it looks like our mission is over. We can't risk sending anyone back down there until we know it's safe. I want you all to take some time to rest and recover. We'll debrief again tomorrow." The divers nodded, feeling a mix of disappointment and relief. They had survived one of the most dangerous and unpredictable places on Earth, but they had also failed to complete their mission. The saturation divers were finally able to leave the diving bell after weeks of being trapped in the depths of the ocean. As they climbed aboard the ship, their faces were tired and pale, but they all hugged each other tightly, relieved to have made it back to the surface alive. While the divers were finally able to stand up straight and breathe in fresh air, they were all smiling from ear to ear. Then everyone's attention turned to an area just off the starboard side, about 90 or so meters away. Large bubbles began to rise above the ocean's surface and burst billowing steam as they did, creating a growing column of foaming water. The commander ordered the ship to move away from the area as quickly as possible, fearing that the bubbles were a sign of a volcanic eruption. The crew could only watch in terror as the column of bubbles grew higher and higher, reaching towards the sky. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion, and a huge plume of smoke and ash shot up from the water. The crew shielded their eyes from the glare as the sun was blocked out by the thick cloud of ash. As the sun began to set, the crew gathered on the deck, watching the distant plume of smoke and ash slowly dissipate. They knew that they had witnessed something extraordinary, but they were also grateful to be alive and safely back on the ship. It was a reminder of the power and unpredictability of the ocean, and a testament to the bravery of those who dared to venture into its depths. Suddenly another explosion took place which was much larger than the one before. It spewed gas and water into a few hundred feet into the air. The crew on the ship sprang into action as soon as they saw the massive eruption taking place under the water. They knew they had to get out of the area fast before the explosions got worse. The captain barked orders to his crew, and they began to pull up anchor and start the engines. The explosions from the underwater eruption grew louder and more intense by the minute. The crew on the ship could feel the vibrations of the explosions even from the safety of the ship's deck. They knew they had to move quickly if they were going to make it out of there alive. As the ship began to pull away from the site of the eruption, the crew could see huge plumes of smoke and steam rising up from the water. The sound of the explosions was deafening, and it seemed like they were getting closer and closer to the ship with each passing moment. The crew worked together to make sure that everything on the ship was secured and in place. They knew that if they hit rough waters or encountered any other obstacles, they would be in big trouble. They had to make it out of there quickly and safely. As they made their way further and further away from the site of the eruption, the crew could see that the explosions were getting even worse. The water around them was churning and boiling, and huge waves were crashing against the side of the ship. Despite the danger, the crew remained focused on their mission. They worked tirelessly to navigate the ship through the treacherous waters and away from the eruption. Finally, they were able to break free of the danger zone and head back to safety. As they looked back at the site of the eruption, the crew could see that the water was still boiling and churning. Huge clouds of steam and smoke were still rising up into the air. They knew that they had been lucky to escape with their lives, and they were all grateful to be back on solid ground. The crew celebrated their safe return with a round of applause and cheers. They had worked together as a team to overcome one of the most dangerous situations they had ever faced. It was a triumph of human spirit, and they knew that they would never forget this experience for as long as they lived. One of the divers, who had been particularly affected by the ordeal, decided to write a book about his experiences. The book was called The Perils of Being a Saturation Diver, and it became a bestseller. In the book, the diver recounted the events of the mission, from the eerie sightings of orbs in the depths of the ocean to the terrifying moment when the earth cracked open and lava spewed out. He described in detail the danger and pressure of working in such a hostile environment, and how the camaraderie and trust among the divers were crucial to their survival. The book became famous not only for its gripping storytelling, but also for shedding light on the dangers and challenges faced by saturation divers. The diver became a celebrity, appearing on talk shows and giving interviews about his experiences. Meanwhile, the incident in the Mariana Trench had caused a stir in the scientific community. The eruption had been one of the most significant and unexpected events in recent history, and scientists were eager to study the effects it had on the ocean and the surrounding ecosystems. The book The Perils of Being a Saturation Diver became a reminder of that mission and a testament to the bravery and perseverance of those who risked their lives to explore the unknown depths of the ocean. Epilogue. In 2019, a documentary movie called The Last Breath was released, which told the real-life story of a serious saturation diving accident in 2012. When diver Chris Lemons had his umbilical cable severed and became trapped around 100 meters under the sea without heat or light, and with only the small amount of breathing gas in his backup tank. The documentary uses genuine footage and audio recorded at the time of the accident on the diver's radios and body cameras, supplemented with interviews of several of the individuals involved, as well as some reconstructed footage to tell the story of the accident. Chris Lemons, along with his colleagues Duncan Alcock and David Uasa, were carrying out repairs 100 meters below the surface of the North Sea, supported by the support vessel Bibi Topaz. The vessel's dynamic positioning system, supplied by Kongsberg Maritime, failed. This caused the vessel to drift in rough seas, dragging the divers away from the area they were working and eventually snapping the umbilical tether that provided Lemons with helix to breathe, as well as hot water to heat his suit, power for his light, and a communications link to the surface. He was left with only 5 minutes of breathable gas contained in the cylinders he wore on his back. For reasons that are unclear to Lemons and his colleagues, but attributed in part to the cold water and having been breathing a gas mix with a high partial pressure of oxygen, Lemons survived for around 30 minutes while he was located by a remote underwater vehicle and then by Uasa, who was able to pull him back on board the Diving Bell. If you are interested in this real-life story, you can find it on BitChute, Netflix, and on other media outlets of your choosing. It is well worth a watch.